Hi everyone, it's B.Chavez from Evil Genius Sports Performance. I'd like to welcome you to another EvilGSP question and answer video. And today's video is two questions. One that I've very much covered a few times in the past, and another one that's kind of trivial but fun and kind of illustrates a point. So anyway, EvilGSP question and answer video. The first question, as I said, is something that I've covered a lot of times, but it was asked to me in a somewhat unique and interesting way, and I thought it was really worthy of sharing with you and covering, just to really elucidate and cover all my thoughts on the subject. And that was something I've covered many times, which is protein intake for athletes, nitrogen intake, which I've stated over and over and over is between 2 and 3 grams per kilogram. Almost always. Tons and tons of research in the 1.8 to 2.8 grams per kilogram. I simply just round that. I've talked about this in the past. Just simply round that to 2 to 3 grams, which is a large amount. The US RDA is 0.8 grams per kilogram. So we're talking, 200% and better, 200 and 300% of the US RDA. But there's very solid reasons for that. I've in the past, pointed out that Dr. Maruti's book, Pasquale's book, Lyle McDonald's book, very good on the subject of protein and protein intake. And but one of the things that this person brought to me was something that I had said in another video, was that most strength athletes really only need about 2 grams per kilogram. But my recommendations for mixed athletes like CrossFit and Scholastic football, rugby, those sorts of things can be higher. And there was a little bit of confusion, a little bit of that kind of your own modality arrogance of, strength athletes, we're bigger and stronger than everyone. Clearly, we need more. I understand the thought, and I certainly understand the personal arrogance to your own endeavor. It's very natural, very normal. I'm not criticizing. But the reality is, the biology is, the way the situation works, most strength athletes train in the world of athletes, greater athletes, athleticism, a relatively low volume schedule. Relatively speaking, they're working 10, maybe 12, maybe 15 total hours of strength training per week. And that's actually really a lot. Most recreational athletes are training into, 4 to 8 hour per week range. Those ranges simply aren't large enough to create vast amounts of catabolism. Anabolism, yes, but anabolism is such an efficient process that it just doesn't dictate that level of nitrogen turnover. Protein turnover rate, everyone out there, if you want to Wikipedia that'll elucidate a lot of this. But it really comes down to total training volume for most strength athletes just simply doesn't reach a level that begins to cause the body to use proteins, amino acids specifically, for energy. Branched chain amino acids, glutamine, a couple others are very easily transferred into usable short-term energy by a healthy metabolism, and that is what's happening in your mixed modality athletes, your MMA guys that are doing, an hour of weight training, 2 hours of event activity, and then running 5 or 10 miles, kilometers and kilometers. That volume of work, especially in such a mixed modality, begins to consume nitrogen for other purposes besides simple anabolism. So the reality is, other high-tier athletes actually require more protein than most strength athletes. But again, kind of this, personal arrogance, 2 grams per kilogram regularly and consistently is still a whopping amount of protein. So it's not as if it's a trivial amount. So hopefully that even more refines my, attitudes and ideas on nitrogen intake. And I really do thank you for the question. Tragically, I didn't pen down who it was. I do apologize to you. But hopefully, since you are a devout listener of mine, you'll see this, know who you are. We can bounce back and forth, and I will definitely notate you in the description and comments. But I just wanted to really cover that, really, especially because that is something that I said publicly, perhaps without defining it quite that succinctly. So yes, 2 to 3 grams per kilogram for athletes, strength athletes and such. And very roughly speaking, the higher the training volume, the higher on that scale of 2 to 3 grams per kilogram. But again, hear me clearly, 3 grams per kilogram is an awful lot of nitrogen. Despite all the yammering you hear in the media and in muscle magazines and that nonsense, most strength athletes, most professional bodybuilders really don't get that much daily. They may get it for time, certainly pre-contest, when they're recompositioning their diet to minimize fat loss or maximize fat loss, minimize body fat, quasi-ketogenic, low carbohydrate environments. Yes, but on a consistent long-term anabolic type of attitude, no, just they're not. If you look at these guys, they do have a very large protein intake, but then when you scale it against their body weight, you find out really they're not consuming these ridiculous ratios. They probably still are getting 2, 3, 4, 5, 600 grams, but if you calculate that against their body weights, they're really not exceeding that 2 to 3 gram per kilogram ratio. One, it's hard to do, and two, it's just simply all that is needed. So there you are, some quick thoughts on protein, nitrogen intake, and the scale of who needs what. And the last question is from one of my UK followers, which I really can't state enough how much I appreciate you guys over there. You treat Evil Genius Sports Performance really well. Especially you, Anita. Especially you. You will like all my stuff. I appreciate that. Anyway, the question is, B.Chavez, I read your training journal on occasion, and particularly interested in your Monday squat workouts. And I noticed that very often you squat, box squat, or some sort of squatting motion, and little to no hip hamstring afterward. Why is that? Well, that's a great question for a bunch of reasons. One, it proves that somebody's reading that journal, which I do appreciate. Sometimes I think I'm talking to myself when I post that, but I would still do it anyway, because as I've said over and over and over, training journals hugely important. And secondly, I never want to be that guy that just yammers off and says a bunch of stuff and has nothing to show for their talking. That training journal, which I will put in the description of this video, down here, I will put the link to that. That is what I do. On a day, every day that I train, it gets recorded there. Not always to the highest degree of detail, but I always want to be the guy that can show that I am doing the things that I'm saying. And when I'm not doing the things that I'm saying, I have an explanation for why. And I appreciate it when somebody calls me on it. There is three major reasons for why that is the case. One, I simply love to squat. I would squat every goddamn day if I could. So squatting is always, on Monday, my priority. That's what I'm going to do. Anything that comes after that is gravy. Squatting is why I have got up that morning, and it's why I'm going to do what I'm going to do. So that's the biggest reason. Second reason is, those of you that may have followed me in my career, was in a very significant accident about 2.5 years ago. Broke both of my feet, and I am somewhat limited on what I can do, and I'm very limited now on the volume of what I can do, because my feet just begin to hurt to such a degree. And so by the time I move through, 6, 8, 10, sometimes 15 sets of squats, sometimes as high as 650 pounds, my feet are hammered, and it's really hard for me to do good morning, stiff-legged deadlifts, that sort of thing. So very often I just simply don't, because it's just not palatable. I just don't want to, because I hurt. So that is a connotation to my particular time and place. 15 years ago, I would have done good mornings, and that would have just been the end of it. So now, not only that, but sometimes the things I do are a little less ideal than I'd like. I'll do, like, say, back extensions instead of good mornings and stuff like that. And a lot of times, as this person pointed out, I do nothing, and that's true, and I'm okay with it at this point in my life. I'm not training for the pinnacle of athletics, that sort of thing, so I can get away with that. And lastly, I want to point out something that doesn't get pointed out enough in general training. I squat deep. I squat low, legal or below, every workout that I am physically possible. I do have this injury. It does limit me sometimes, but as a rule, I squat as low as I'm able. And because of that, there's an awful lot of glute hamstring activation that a lot of these shallow squatters don't get. Sometimes I squat, literally, I'll just do 10 or 15 sets of squats, nothing else. And the most sore part of me is my glutes and hamstrings, not my quads. Okay, so low squatting is a high activator of the posterior chain. I hate that phrase, stupidest thing I ever heard, but it works in this conversation. It's such an activator of those muscles because of the extreme range of motion that a lot of times all of this ridiculous accessory hamstring work is really not necessary. It's very optional, and in my case, I option not to do it. So I do very much appreciate you reading that journal, and I even more appreciate that you're taking the time to digest it and then actually act on your thoughts and ask a question. That is what this is all about. That's how science, that's how communication, that's how everything moves forward. It's how we will make better athletes, and for that, I very much appreciate you. And I appreciate all of you, everyone out there who takes the time to listen to this video. So there you are, some thoughts on protein intake and my personal training journal and the fact that deep squats do work your ass and glutes and hamstrings, and you don't really need to do tons of accessory stuff. And when you're beat up and broken like myself, you get away with not doing it anyway. So there you are. Evil Genius Sports Performance question and answers. B.Chavez, Evil Genius Sports Performance. Until next time, stay strong.